Hey, welcome to Overtime, where we take Sunday's message further. My name is Jeremy, and I'm your host. And this is a podcast where we just want to ask the questions that we think that you would ask as it relates to Sunday's message. And as we do so, we hope that it helps you grow in your life and your faith. With that being said, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date on all of the podcasts that are coming out. Not only that, hit the like button, because when you do so, it helps us help other people. And if you ever have a question about Sunday's content or about Overtime, you can submit those to overtime@npaustin.com, and we will be sure to get to those in future podcasts. So with that being said, here's a quick recap of Sunday, and then we're going to jump into our conversation today.
You could just say the direction of your life is heading in the direction of your strongest thoughts. But the good news about this problem is there is a solution. 50% of the battle is knowing that we are in a battle. And the game plan that we've kind of introduced throughout this is this. It's retire, replace, and repeat. And today, I want to land on repeat. And there are essentially 3 types of influences that you want to retire. And there's 2 types of voices that we experience that are good. Now you repeat again and again and again. And Paul says, put on the full armor of God. And then he lands with this in mind, be alert and always keep on praying. He's saying, keep doing it. It is repetition. Over time, maybe you have to think, I am forgiven. You are not alone. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. If Jesus were to show up in the room, I think one of the first things he would say is, I love you. You're like, yeah, no, I've seen on billboards. I've got the t-shirts and the stickers. No, I love you.
All right, well, we are wrapping up the series we've been in the past couple of weeks, Remodeling Your Mind. It is sad because it has been a good series.
Yeah,
and
I feel that with you.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And even though it's only been 3 parts, it feels like we've been in this series for quite a while. And we've had a ton of great conversations with, Buck part 1, Jen part 2, and you part 3. And we want to get really, really practical today. But first, I wanted to follow up on a couple of things that you talked about.
Okay.
One is, you talked about your competitive nature. And, I have been on the other side of your, I became a sports person because we were roommates in college, and you fell asleep to Sports Center every night. Yeah. Like I didn't have an option, right?
Yeah, Emily won that battle in marriage. You didn't win it in college. So
no, I was, I did not at all.
Yeah.
Yep, so I became more of a sports person.
That's good for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. But not nearly as competitive as you are when it comes to sports.
Yeah. This is true. But it depends on the type of sport. You've got your Taekwondo background. And
this is true.
Trophies as tall as we are,
Yep.
So where are those now?
I honestly don't know. Probably my parents' house. I wouldn't be surprised if they tossed them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you ever talked about that in the podcast, but Jeremy has a background as a Taekwondo extraordinaire. Traveled the world, literally the world. And we used to stay the night at his house in middle school, and the trophies were bigger than us. We had to make room and lay down next to the trophies that were all around the room. And
yeah,
so it's in there. It just maybe not the more traditional anything with a sphere, a ball of any kind.
Well, what's really funny now is nowadays whenever I, we babysat the Giebel House boys, and they do street football.
Yeah.
And there's something young in me that never came alive, and he comes alive when I'm playing with these 10-year-olds.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I could be a running back.
It takes you back.
Yep.
Now you drink coffee out of camera lenses.
Yes. Yep. I drink coffee out of camera lenses.
That looks scary. If you walk in and don't know what that is, you're like, what are we doing here with our,
Yeah, well, these are cups. They're actually cups.
Okay.
And, Josh actually got, because we handed them out to media team members.
Oh, well,
here
that
in
makes
Northpoint.
sense.
Yeah, there's some connections there. Chris McSorley saw Josh put the cup on top of his car as he was getting in his car.
Oh, yeah.
And Chris was like, Josh, you can't put a camera lens. Those are thousands of dollars. And Josh was like, oh, and then messed with Chris. There was one instance that I wanted to talk about, though, and it was because it was an instance where I challenged you publicly and in front of our whole team. So we do a rally backstage, and you remember this. And, when we rally, we talk about the service plan and, everybody's timing and all that stuff. Make sure we stay within the window of 65 minutes is the goal. And we had a 15-minute closing video. It was the interview of you and Jeff Brown. This was a part of the Level Up series. And I remember because it was a 15-minute video, you had 20-ish minutes to teach. And I remember publicly in front of the whole team, I said, and then Jordan's going to teach for 20 minutes. And then I think I said something like, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah.
How did that feel when I said that to you?
Well, one, it was probably manipulative on your part, 'cause you know me well. But yeah, it has to be like a genuine doubt. You know, like you can't just like walk in the room knowing that about me and tell me but like when people, I really get the sense that they doubted me. I can't imagine that comes from a healthy place. Like that feels like something insecure in me. But like if somebody like comes in and like for real doubts, says I'm not the guy, can't do it, something rises in me that I have to, you know, I don't know. It's a little irrational.
Destroy them is what you were going to say.
Kind of. I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. Like, okay, Lord, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what kind of rises, you know. Yeah, the Enneagram 3 a little bit. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that's probably some of my dad challenging me. And yeah, I think about our sophomore year chemistry teacher. I was in baseball and I had a class rank and she knew what it was. And she just had this genuine doubt of like, man, it's so sad that you can't stay in baseball and maintain that. Like you're going to drop. And now I'm like, dang it, now I have to do my homework for the next 3 years, you know, because you just told me I couldn't play sports and have this, you know, class rank. And I'm like, but yeah, it was a genuine doubt though. She was like,
or maybe she was genuinely like believed in you, but understood what it took.
I don't know.
Probably not.
I don't know. It didn't feel like it.
Well, here, let's move on.
Yeah.
And kudos to you because you did teach, I think, for 22 minutes that Sunday.
Thank you. I've been waiting for that for the month since, so thank you.
There you go. A month later. Congratulations.
I appreciate that.
Today, like I said, we are wrapping up the series, Remodeling Your Mind, and there's so many big concepts. I mean, we're talking about Grand Canyons of neural pathways in our brain that have been written for decades in our life. And so 3 Sundays that feel good and we're inspired, it's going to be tough to have any change in our life, you know, without getting really, really practical. Yeah. And so, you know, you mentioned beforehand and you and I were talking as we were thinking about this podcast, like we just want to get really, really practical today and talk about a ton of different ways that we can take what we've learned in these last 3 weeks and we can apply it in our life. And there's so many different, you know, kind of avenues and aspects of what Buck and Jen and you talked about that we can take and distill down to some practical things. And I think our hope for those listening today would be that you just take away maybe even just one of these. I mean, if we hit, 15 plus practical things that we can do, maybe you take away just one of these or 2 of these and you apply this in your life. And the thing that, you know, Jordan and I would hope is that it would allow you, it would partner with you, it would help you, motivate you to really take thoughts captive, submit them to Jesus, and begin to experience kind of the positive aspect of thoughts and really try to rework those and redig new Grand Canyons in your life that are good. So,
yeah, I think that's just the big hope. You know, it's just there's too much that we talked about to not like have something be different walking away from the series, and just that would be the hope and the desire. Is not like, oh, good ideas, good concepts, but then like nothing changes and we keep building the same pathway. So you know, we'll probably just title the podcast however many tools we talk about and just hope you use one of them, and that's kind of the goal of I think our time. So.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's talk about the first. I'm going to take this from some of the practical things you ended your message with this week.
Yeah, sure.
Let's talk about the affirmations one. And you actually had a piece of paper and you shared some of these on Sunday.
Yeah.
Let's hone in on that. So what does it mean to make affirmations, these like personal affirmations, practical?
Yeah, well, I was excited about this one. I had some people ask afterwards, you know, like, hey, where do those come from, or how do I make them, or whatever that might be. And so a couple of resources could be, one, John Acuff wrote a book called Soundtracks, and that actually inspired a lot of this series.
Yep.
A lot of the language that we even used of the retire, replace, and repeat came from that book. And he's funny. He's like a comedian, self-help, you know, guy. And I you know, you could listen to the audiobook because he narrates it and he adds some stuff.
And that one's great too. Sorry, if you're not a Jesus follower,
right,
and you want something that's a little bit more just sciencey, like that's a good one to hone in on.
Yeah, he hires like a researcher for all of his books, you know, almost like a kind of a sociologist, if you will. But it's like I think like no spiritual, so it's a very just like kind of neutral book. You could recommend it to a friend, you know, whatever it might be. But in it, he starts to develop this anthem. So he has an actual anthem that is like kind of these lists of declarations. And what's nice about that one is you wouldn't have to write your own if you don't know where to start. So he's just kind of like, hey, you can go online, you can download the PDF, we'll link to it. We didn't really say that up front, but just we're basically going to have a long resource list in the description of this one that links to books, sites, articles, tools, all that kind of stuff.
Cool.
So anything we mention here, you can find it in the description after. But there's a PDF you can download online, and you can read, exactly what that affirmation says, which is cool. Or you kind of edit it and make it your own. And then kind of on the much more like faith-based side. So another kind of inspiration for the series was Craig Groeschel. He's the lead pastor of Life Church, and he wrote a book called Winning the War in Your Mind. And we had, several ideas, several foundational things that were helpful from that book too in this series. So you could read that book also, that would be helpful. But that was when I said, hey, kind of mentor from a distance type thing. Craig was who I was referring to when I said I several years ago put together this list, because I was listening to his leadership podcast and have for years. One of those things where you feel like you know a guy, but obviously he has no idea who I am. But I went and took a lot of his and then made them personal and edited them and so on. And that's where I've been looking at that list, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 years now. And so, but there's a site, and so we'll link to that as well, that has kind of his personal affirmations. So, you scroll down this link and he's got, Jesus is first in my life. I exist to serve and glorify him. I love my life and will lay down my life to serve her. Right. He goes down this list. And then he has a big long list, and he just titled it a list of positive affirmations for anyone. Right. And he's got this whole long thing. I'm not my past. I'm not what I did. I am who God says I am. He says I'm forgiven. I mean, this, you could pick, the ones that speak to you most on there. And what's kind of cool about this resource in particular, if you are approaching it more from kind of like the faith-based perspective, is every single one has a hyperlink to, where what verse like inspired that affirmation. So you could connect it to, what kind of scripture is backing this up. And again, I mentioned that on stage. I like that because it helps me in my moments of self-doubt trust that that's true, because it's like based in something that is true.
Yeah,
so.
and you're replacing a kind of a Grand Canyon lie, with something that is, foundationally true in Scripture.
Yeah, yeah. Just so many good ones on here. I don't have a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love. Lord is my helper. I'll not be afraid. There's just kind of whatever your kind of core fear, core challenge, that thought you're trying to, there's going to be a counter one, in this list that is really helpful. And I didn't really talk about, on Sunday, like saying it out loud. There is a lot of research to, hey, it may feel uncomfortable or awkward, but if you can kind of muster up that courage, you're alone, maybe say it out loud, look in a mirror, say it to yourself, it's just, it adds more of that pathway. It's physical. You're interacting with it. You hear it.
Maybe give your spouse a heads up.
Yeah, exactly.
So they're not like, who are you talking to?
100%. Yeah, John's real funny in the book, talking about like sneaking around, so his kids don't like know, or goes in the bathroom, he's just talking to himself. But or even if you read them, I think morning and night kind of starts your day that way, and then there's a lot of science behind the last thing that you give your attention to at the end of the day, kind of running through your mind and so on. And so if it's a way that you end your day as well. And those are just one of those, like, it costs you nothing, but literally maybe 30 seconds of your time, and, stop it after, 2 weeks or 30 days if it's not helpful. But for me, I mean, it is crazy how much the appropriate one pops into my mind in the right moment of self-doubt, or I got a negative talk, or my, insecurities, imposters taking over. So many of those pop up regularly for me. So,
yeah. And I'll add on too, I've listened to soundtracks and Winning the War in Your Mind. Yeah. They're both great listens. So if somebody's an Audible person or listener, they're fantastic. And Winning the War in Your Mind, Craig really, I think he does it in that website that we're going to link to as well, but he really goes through each of those and in depth. And he also just talks about writing your own and what the process can look like and stuff like that. And it's really, really helpful.
100%.
Cool. So that's taking those affirmations, making those practical. Let's move on to another one. You talked about journaling and writing. Yeah. What for you is helpful to make writing practical? And I know I've got some thoughts on this one as well.
Yeah, I almost want to deflect to you, because you're the one that ultimately gave me the writing prompt that I use in the morning. And I've edited it with time. I think one of the things that's helped my personality type is like probably one of my negative tracks in my head for a long time is I'll never be as disciplined as Jeremy Edelin. That's like one of my thoughts. Like I just can't keep up, and so for me, like not having it need to be perfect, I've taken out some of the questions. I made it simpler for me because it just seems hard for me to answer a whole bunch of questions, early in the morning. But I just have a couple now that I use. I do think though, like the physical process of writing, typing it out, seeing, I think that works too. It's visual. It's getting those thoughts kind of onto paper, really kind of helps. This might be your excuse to get an iPad. Because one of the things I like is, you can write with the Apple Pencil and then it turns it into text for you with the new iOS and everything. So that's really great as well. But if you just, start small and, kind of have that a space or a time that you dedicate to this and it's part of your regular rhythm, there's a lot of science behind writing these truths down, writing these declarations down, writing scripture out, is a great way to just kind of sit with it. And it is, try that alone. Like you write a verse out and like different words like stick out to you different than when you just like hear the whole verse, in a paragraph and you're going through fast or something. You kind of hang on every word in a different way. So, and it also kind of helps you just capture what is negative, to kind of capture, here's what I'm thinking or experiencing. Here are the voices that I'm hearing. I'm going to like get those out of my head, if you will. I mean, you get that stress or that anxiety, and it kind of feels sometimes like a physical transferring from your head to paper. Like I pulled it out,
Yeah.
and I'm going to, retire that, or I'm going to give that to God today or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So a lot of helpful pieces of writing. But yeah, you gave me the journaling prompt. You still use that same one, or do you?
Yeah. I mean, it's changed over the years in terms of, and I've given myself a whole lot more grace to like be very, very imperfect with it. But I guess I heard Michael Hyatt say it, I don't know, had to have been 5 or 6 years ago now. And he just talked about this prompt because I'd always wanted to journal, but really what ended up happening is I would, read something in the Bible and then just like write down what that was. And that was great to start, but journaling became for me like just a place to be and a place to like sift through my thoughts. One of my favorite Psalms is that a man's heart are like deep waters. I think I said it on the podcast last week.
Yeah.
Because it's just one of my favorites. Like a man's heart are like deep waters, one with insight draws them out. And so for me, I just feel like there's so much going on in there for all of us, in our brains and our hearts. And journaling for me is a way to take kind of both the left brain and the right brain and be able to sift through what are the lies and what is true and really be able to submit those things to God. And so the three like basic things are, what happened yesterday, what's going on right now, and what's happening like today. And so with what's happened yesterday, I'll literally write down, sometimes it's like, it was a good day, and that's it. But then it's, what am I learning? As a result of what happened yesterday? Was there anything that happened that I want to go, I want to write that down? Or, for a lot of times lately, like with, we're about to have our first son.
Yeah.
So it was the baby shower this weekend and all, learning time. I just put, I just like so saw God's faithfulness in my life. And that was something notable that I wanted to write down,
Right.
And then, what are some wins? Just what are some wins? Like, if, I started a new habit and I hit day 10 and, that was a win. I want to write that down and make note of that because it's important to celebrate those things.
Yeah.
So that's what happened yesterday. And then what's going on right now is two things for me. It's what am I thankful for right now? And this is more than an attitude of gratitude, because I think an attitude of gratitude is great, but you get an attitude of gratitude by creating a habit of gratitude. Yeah. And so, writing down what am I thankful for, and I'll do anywhere from 5 to 10 things, and a lot of the times they're the same things.
Yeah.
But I think I need to be reminded on a regular basis how thankful I am for my wife. You know what I mean? And so to write that down every morning is helpful. And then what am I feeling? I'm a very logical-oriented person, and so feelings are a little bit harder for me to sift through, but they're there. I just got to understand what's the cause of them, and are they true or not. And so what am I feeling is really important for me to, like what you just said, take what is like up in my brain and tangibly put it to paper. Because when you put it on paper, then you go like, oh, that's silly. Like, why have I given that so much airtime in my mind?
Right.
I can take that and submit it to God. And so, and for me, I've shared this before, but I use the emojis on my phone sometimes when I'm like, I don't know what I'm feeling. Yeah. And I'll just pick an emoji on my phone and be like, that's the one I resonate with the most. And then unpack it from there a little bit.
Right. So, no, that's awesome. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I haven't heard that before. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. I that's something, I mean, maybe a little bit in part 2, Jen was talking about whatever's praiseworthy, think about such things, but like gratitude alone, like is a whole, that could have been part 4 of the series.
Yep.
Cultivating that. And then what that does in your mind. I mean, it's extraordinary. Like I like how you mentioned Ashley, because there's this like, if you think about your spouse and if you think even like specifically about your love story, like you're like, this is how we met. These were the early days. This was our first date.
Yeah.
This was like, there's signs to be like, if you just sit and think deeply about that, like you remember and you're grateful for it. Like next time you see your spouse, that's the one that you attach that feeling and emotion to, that gratitude to, and so on. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And so all of a sudden, like your connection is strengthened. They weren't even in the room, but it's because you thought deeply about being grateful for them.
Yep.
You know, and I'll do that. So, you know, you're exactly what you're talking about, but like writing something I'm grateful for her. And like, I'll feel myself like smiling, wanting to like send her a text, and she's not even there, you know, but it's like, it's this power of thought versus if you're like, man, you're focused on the, 10 things I didn't do and the way they frustrated you. And you're like, okay, well, Emily doesn't do 10 things in a day ever to frustrate me, but it's a hypothetical situation.
Yeah.
So it's like, that kind of like, it's just so powerful, that cultivation of gratitude.
Yeah.
But
I'd also say just the wins and the thankful and the celebrations. Like, I don't know, Ashley and I do this thing at the end of every year. We started it just a couple of years ago. We were like, dang, that was amazing. Why haven't we ever done that before? Where we just make a whole list of all the celebrations for the entire previous year.
Yeah.
And I remember we both went into it and we were like, there's some good things. And then we ended up with this list of like 30 things. Like, wow, that was amazing. But we go through life so fast, sometimes we forget to celebrate the little wins. And it's really important to do so because they're life-giving.
Yeah.
You know, we tend to focus on the negative. Culture focuses on the negative.
Right.
You got to celebrate those things. And that is how you think about what is pure and noble and right and true and admirable and lovely on a regular basis over and over again, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's difficult to find something like, grateful, that you're grateful about in the day before, it's probably more likely than not like a result of not having tried to cultivate that before.
Yeah.
Because once you start looking for it, you're able to start to gravitate to things, even in like really dark, hard seasons.
Yep.
So
and
it's really powerful.
Yeah, I'll add on too. This isn't like a, I don't know. You could chalk this up to being just like, gratitude, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. It's such a cliche sometimes, or journaling, like, oh, that's for those people, those feeler people. But even there was I'm blanking on his name right now, but there was a book I read called Not Delivering Happiness, because that's the shoe one.
That's the Zappos
What is it called? I think it's called The Happiness Advantage. Okay. And it was about this guy he was a Harvard student, and he studied happiness and and he basically came to the conclusion that happy people choose to be happy.
Right.
Like there's no circumstantial evidence, there's no like life experience. They just literally choose on a regular basis.
In the same circumstances, different results. Yeah.
They just choose it.
Yeah.
And so like, how do you choose it? Well, you create these kind of habits that remind you of, the positive things.
Yeah.
Potentially in a world that's really, really negative.
Yeah. I think about Carey Nieuwhof's Didn't See It Coming, like the cynicism. He just talks about how old people are usually in one of the two extremes,
Yep.
Like when you're north of 80, you either like hate the world and everything in it, or like nothing faces you. And you're like always, hey, it's going to be all right, sweetie, Yep. And he's like, we're fossilizing into one or the other.
Yeah.
We're building these pathways into like, man, I always see the good and am grateful for, even in the worst of life, or everything's awful, and it's just that step-by-step process, of your brain wiring itself over time. So
Yeah. I will say with journaling, it can be a little intimidating to start.
Yeah.
And to talk about, okay, I'm going to answer 9 questions every day, like that's a lot. And I think it's important to start small and give yourself a whole lot of grace with journaling.
Yeah.
It is not about perfection. It's about progress.
Yeah.
And, to sit down and journal, some of the things I would say to people who have never done it before and are like, I don't know if I could. I think like put it on the calendar. Find your physical space. What is your physical space in your house? It's probably not, outside on the patio if there's construction going on next to you. That's probably not the best physical space. Find your physical space, find the time. For me, we have this little nook next to our laundry room that with this desk, and I've got a chair and it's got a lamp, and I go there every morning at 5:30 in the morning, and that's my spot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it only really changes, every now and then, but even when I find we go on trips or something, like I miss my space, because I want to be back in that space.
Right.
And then, you start small, and then you don't give up when you miss a day.
Yeah.
John Acuff has this great phrase where he says, the most important day in any habit is the day after perfect.
Right.
So it's when you fail.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're gonna fail and just give up then, or are you gonna continue trying?
Yeah. Yeah, set your goal at like once a month. So any bonus day is extra, and now you're killing it. Versus like I set it at 7 days and felt disappointed by 6 days. You're like, no. So no, 100%. That's awesome. Should we move on to the
Yes.
The next one there.
Yep. So the next one you talked about was making meditation practical.
Yeah. Yeah, this is another one where it's like you hear it talked about all the time, but then it seems like there's 1,000 different ways to do it. And you're like, how do I start? And I think what's helpful with this one, there are a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of things. You do quick Google search, quick guide, and a lot of things will lead you in a good direction. You're going to see a lot of, it's so much just about mindfulness, so much about awareness of what is around you, what is happening, in your body even, where you're feeling different anxieties and stresses. And it creates this, I already said the word, but it creates this mindfulness. There's just, simple tools to help you do that. So one of the ones that I think about from a while ago with my counselor was he talked about this idea of like breathing God in and breathing myself out, type thing. And with each breath, I'm slowing down my breath. And I'm focusing on that. There's this idea of like, creates this awareness that God is with me. There's this peace, this comfort that strengthen that. And I'm just breathing out my stresses, my anxieties, and, so on. And it's one of those things that calms your heart rate, calms your body. You're more focused, you're more present. And I need to do this like quite a lot. I mean, I don't know how different wirings and stuff, but for me, like at the end of a work day, I'm still thinking about like whatever I was most stressed about, whatever, problem was most pressing on my mind coming home. And I'm, 50% there or worse, like seeing Emily walking in the door, I'm just not there. And she's really cool about it because she understands that about me now. And I'm like, hey, I need like 10 minutes. Like, I just need to go sit on the bed for, 10 minutes or whatever. Just give me a little space. And I'll like literally, I'll just breathe, you know what I mean? Those kinds of things to like calm down, get in a different headspace and so on. Yeah. But there's so many different ways to do this, right? You can focus on a word. We talked a little bit about how, on Sunday, the difference between like clearing your head versus just filling it with something true. And part of what we're pushing you to do is also like fill it with what is true. And so it can be a word or a phrase, I'm safe, or, God is with me, or I'm forgiven, or, and you just kind of focus on that phrase for a few minutes and you're just thinking deeply and intently about like that word or phrase. It could be a verse that you're kind of repeating yourself, again and again. But the whole point is this like focused thought. And if you've never done it before, chances are you're going to think about a million things, and that's okay. Like part of that is just that moment of awareness that you've drifted. That's great because it's a moment of awareness. Now just like recenter around whatever you're trying to do, the breathing or the word or whatever it might be. And you're totally going to think about whatever's on your mind, work, kids, food, you're going to hear the AC. It's like stuff's going to happen like that. But that's part of what you're doing is you're cultivating this kind of like mindfulness and this presentness, and it will get easier over time. Like you'll be able to sit there maybe for 10 seconds at first, but then a minute, and then a couple weeks later it's 5, and then a couple weeks, and you can really sit there in that kind of state of like of awareness for a while, which is awesome.
I'll add on to that too. In Soundtracks, John talks about mindfulness, and that seems to be a 21st century like throw out word. Like it's really fun. It sounds cool, but what actually is mindfulness? And he defines it as it's basically viewing yourself from a non-judgmental stance. So he says when you try to control your thoughts, you can give yourself the freedom to say, "Oops, oh well." So if you find your mind drifting, or you're not judging yourself for that. You're just going, "Oops, oh well." You know what I mean? And that's like a mindfulness, like I guess state of being.
Right. Yeah, and it's an interesting topic, right? In that like cultures have been doing this since the beginning of time. Like as far as we know, people like this has been a practice. This has been a thing, right? And we are so overloaded with stuff now. Like, social media is a unique beast. Like a phone in our hands 6 to 8 hours a day is a new animal, and so there is this constant like connection to a device, to information overload and so on. So it's as important as ever in human history, or maybe more important today than it's ever been, to, have a practice like that where we can really, be present and focus on what's true and think deeply. So, and there's just a lot of cool tools with this, right? I think maybe I've done all the book plugs I can after this one, but another one that actually my brother had recommended was Switch On Your Brain. And it's weird because it's probably the most sciencey and the most spiritual of all the ones that we went through. Just like this incredible amount of scripture, but she's a neurologist and all this kind of stuff. And talks a lot about like the brain science of what's happening, in your mind whenever these thought patterns change and switch and so on. But she has this 21-day detox that's like actually a plan. I think it's a paid thing, so I don't know if this is like the simplest on-ramp thing, but that she, kind of walks you through and very practical of what these moments look like. She's like 7 to 10 minutes a day, and here's like some of the things to be aware of, some of the questions to ask yourself, some of what you want to be focusing on it, and just this really great kind of guide of a how-to. And I love the idea of it's like a brain detox is what she calls it. I'm like, that'd be great. We need a brain detox. So practical things like that. I think you were mentioning the app.
Yeah, there's an app called Headspace that I've really enjoyed.
Yep.
And it's more, I really like the distinction you made on Sunday. You said that Eastern meditation is about emptying the mind, whereas Christian meditation is about filling the mind with, thoughts from God. And so, the app is much more based on the Eastern meditation side of things. But for someone, like me, I feel like this is a really hard discipline for me, like meditation, because I just struggle to like really force myself to slow down.
Yeah.
And so the Headspace app for me is giving me just a few like super practical tools on, how to put yourself like present in the room. And so, you think about things like, what are you feeling? And so you feel yourself in the chair, and what are you listening to? Oh, I can hear the AC running. And it like brings you into the room versus all the other things that, thoughts of the day. So the Headspace app just has a lot of good like guided meditation things. Yep. And I think there's a free like basic plan you can do. It's like 10 sessions. And then from there you can pay, but I don't think it's crazy expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. That's great. Any of those, again, the whole point of this podcast, hopefully, like pick one of these, like not all of them, but any of those tools, anything to just get you started with it. This was, I talked about that a little Sunday. This seems to be one of the quickest to like change your brain the fastest. Like this is where the brain scans show, prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for our self-control, our awareness, It's
like the lowest cost, biggest ROI, like right away.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So then you talked about memorization, and we've both been on the other side of Buck, for multiple occasions when he's talked about how important it is to memorize scripture. Yeah. So talk more about how do we make that practical?
Yeah, so this is just another tool that I've enjoyed. There's an app called the Verses app if you're specifically trying to memorize scripture. So, obviously, I'm sure there are similar tools to memorize, almost anything, but the Verses app is cool. I'll have it here. Just in that you can pick like any verse, any section, a whole chapter, whatever you want to do. And it kind of gives you these like activity rings, just like you'd have on your Apple Watch or something like that as you, get more of it down. And, you have just different, they're almost like games, not quite like games, but different ways to like reorder it, type it out, speak it out. That helps you just like really quickly like connect different patterns and memorize a whole lot quicker. It keeps track of your streaks and stuff like that. So if you're R3 like me and you enjoy that kind of gamified stuff, it makes it helpful. You can build different collections and all these. And so just a really simple tool that I personally have been using for a while that, it makes it really helpful for me. This is kind of an overlap in terms of writing it down, but I do think typically like the action of writing it down is something that really helps challenge and think about, especially if you're not looking right at it, but you're trying to remember. Helps build that process a little bit in your mind that I think is super helpful. But any of those tools, not to like bring you back to grade school or something like that, but any of those kind of tools that help you remember over time, I think this is kind of like an everyday, type thing, or not that you have to do it every single day, but don't just like, man, I can remember it in a sitting. It's probably not memorized. It's more stored in your short-term memory. In that moment, you're trying to move it to your long-term memory and have it be, part of that, that pattern or that trench that's formed. That's that kind of Psalm 119, hiding it in your heart type thing.
Yeah. Have there been any instances for you? Obviously hearing Buck talk about it is enticing to go like, okay, we need to memorize scripture. When have you felt the value of it on the other side? Has there been like a specific moment or moments or?
Wow. Yeah, 100%. I think as a 3, one of the ones that's really helpful is like, I think about Colossians 3:23 was, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart is working for the Lord. And there's this thing in me that like, I have this tension of like, a 3 is this very like kind of, productivity driven. I find a lot of my identity in what I do. And so then I'm like, well, is the opposite of that to just like sit and be zen and do nothing? Like, is that what the healthiest version of me would do? And it's like, no, it's not. The healthiest version of me is like understanding why I do what I do, And so there's like, man, I'm called to work hard. And I think about that one a lot, like in the message prep mode where I talked about, my anxiety that I felt and so on. That's just like really helpful for me. I think about, the end of Romans all the time. time that, there's nothing that I can do that can separate me from the love of God, neither height nor depth nor angels, So like going through those kinds of things in the moments of like, man, I feel like I'm too far gone, or I feel like, God is disappointed in me, or I feel like whatever. It's just a reminder that he's like here with me. And so like, I'm trying to think, is there one moment, but there's more like a sequence of moments to be like, oh, in message prep, this seems to come up when I'm stressed and overwhelmed, this kind of seems to come up for me. That seems to be, really helpful. So yeah.
Yeah.
I think about high school when we did the Colossians.
Yeah.
The Colossians 3. I definitely don't have all Colossians 3 anymore, but I'm thinking like set your hearts and minds on things above. Like I'm like really thinking about how it starts and,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for context, our small group leader, Jeff Brown, he made a bet with us in our small group who could memorize Colossians 3. And I don't remember maybe we just got more meals.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
But then I know he made a bet to memorize the entire book of Colossians, and nobody did it. But he did say that if we did it, we'd get to go to iFly and do the skydiving thing. So, but none of us did it, so we never did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just that chapter. I think that was an accomplishment. I mean, that was impressive that you got a bunch of high school kids to do that.
Yeah.
So, very.
Yeah, for sure.
But what about you? Do you have the same kind of question your way, ones that pop up for you?
Yeah, I think, being backstage, there's two that I go to again, the same power that raised Christ from the dead lives in me. Mm-hmm. Paul talks about that. And then I think it's in the book of Acts. Honestly, I'm horrible, I'm good at remembering the sentences.
Yeah,
I'm horrible at remembering the verses.
We've made up the verses if you study how the Bible came together.
Yeah.
So it's all good. It's
the words I feel like I'm better at.
Yeah.
And then, do not worry about what you're going to say, but the Holy Spirit will intercede on your behalf.
Mm-hmm.
But just before like speaking or hosting or something like that, getting nervous, it's like, no, I'm not alone in this,
Yeah.
And one of my themes this year, it's weird, I don't have all the context to like talk through it, but it's from Matthew McConaughey's book Green Lights, and he has this whole thing. He talks about standing on your own 2 feet.
Yeah.
And it's been a theme, like a goal theme of mine this year is sinking more into who God says I am and all this stuff. And so early in the year, I did Psalm 23. It's one of my favorite psalms. But I did the Passion Translation, and something it says in there is, God, your authority is my strength and my peace. And so it's kind of, God's big enough to give me peace and also to give me confidence.
Yeah.
And so when I'm faced with an obstacle or something like that, I just say, God, your authority is my strength and my peace. God, and that's been one that I've kind of gone back to a lot this year.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So,
yeah.
But the problem with memorizing scripture for me is I'll have a season where I'm like, yeah, this is it.
Sure, yeah.
And then like a year later, I totally forget what it is.
Right.
So I don't know. I heard somebody having like a old contact book that they flip through, and so they've got cards of all the ones they've memorized, so they go back to it and stuff like that. So I don't know. I need to figure out how to hold on to them a little bit longer than just like a year or something.
Right. Yeah. Running list. I have like a doc that's like a message prep doc, like these are the ones I like read through, and I don't remember them verbatim because there's so many in there. Yeah. So I have the same challenge, but there's like concepts. It's like the truth of it still.
Yeah.
Like I have one of them that is so helpful for me is like Moses like begs God to send somebody else to speak. He's like, I'm not eloquent, and God's like, who gives you words? Who allows man to speak? And I don't have it down verbatim, but I have this memory of like, okay, Moses, like hero of the faith, like begged God, please, I don't want to teach. Like, please, I don't want to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I've been there so many times,
Yeah.
But it's ultimately, it's God that shows up. And so, sometimes I want to be, careful to the same kind of principle you're saying that, man, it's like, it's that idea, that principle in it too. If you're like, oh man, word for word, so hard for me. It's like, hey, it's not like, not valuable to you to try the exercise.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Well, let's wrap up. Are there any other forms of repetition? We've talked about writing, making writing practical. We've talked about making the meditation piece practical, making the memorization piece practical, and just all of these different tools that you can use. Any other things you would kind of tack on there at the end?
Yeah, I think, anything that you're trying to like remind yourself of, a truism, a verse or whatever, like making it visible, like that adds to the repetition. So like, your phone screen, your desktop, like, I don't know if you got a spot in your car, your fridge, or like somewhere you're just going to like bump into this thing a lot is something that helps, make it really repetitious, I think. can be a form of repetition if you stick with it with time, but we didn't plug counseling, real hard in this one. We've had series where we've done that a lot, but I think it's like an important kind of note to say, if you have one of those Grand Canyon type trenches, something that is rooted in a trauma, something that goes back, into your past or into your childhood or so on, there's going to be people who are professionals at helping you unwind those, pathways. It's going to be really, really helpful. Yep. And so it wasn't a major one that we focused on, but I don't want to give the illusion that, your most difficult life circumstance, your greatest pain you've ever gone through, that you can get through that just on your own in a room, talking to nobody, no connection, just writing it down. You know what I mean? Yeah. There's more to it than that. So, that's one. And there's a lot on the music that you listen to as well, which is really interesting. And I know you're more of the music guy than I am. But that's just, and this because you can pull back a song from 30 years ago, that somebody says, and you still know the chorus, or you may know all the, lyrics to the song.
They're hardwired into your brain.
Yeah, 100%. Acuff, I think, actually hits on that in soundtracks too. He's like, there's an age. It's like 13 to 16. Your songs from like those days or something are the ones that are most likely just with you for life, they're in there. And but there's something about like the rhythm that helps it easier to memorize, and like typically the experience of the place you were, you correlate it with a moment, as a first dance song, it was whatever it was, and those are things that play a lot in. But it can be helpful to think like, man, am I listening to music that does like help with my peace, or that does put like good thoughts in my head versus stuff that's like, man, gonna make me have a view of the world that maybe I don't want to have. It's something to pay attention to.
Man, that's really good. Well, I don't know how many we hit total, but it
now you gotta go count.
Now you gotta go count.
We'll let Josh title it. I don't know what the numbers are.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Well, it has been a great series, and I'll just reiterate what I said at the beginning is, this is Jordan and I being vulnerable in like the things that we feel like we've had success with this in this area, and the things that we feel like we're working on. And, for years and years, we've talked about like, goals every year and stuff like that. And so it comes down to what are you doing on a regular basis? Mm-hmm. What are you doing habitually? And, like you talked about, repeating, retire, replace, repeat implies habit. So it's instilling these habits into our life that it's going to allow us to do that. And so I'll just say again, we just talked about, 15 to 20 possible ones. Pick one or two or three. I would say don't go over three. Maybe just pick one. I don't know.
I think it's the best.
I like
pick
one.
Yeah,
pick one and just try to hone in on that one for the next month, or put a deadline on it and just say, I'm going to work on this thing right here to try to rewire my brain towards the things that are true in my life.
Yep. 100%.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and I'm really pumped. Bittersweet that we wrapped up Remodeling Your Mind, but we're kicking off a brand new series this week, so you're not going to want to miss out. So we will either see you online on Sunday, or we'll see you in person.